Welcome to TRT World. I am Semir Sejfovic, and in this week's Across the Balkans, we bring you the latest stories from the region and how countries, governments, and the population are affected. In Serbia, anti-government protests have stretched into their 10th month, sparked by students demanding snap elections. The movement has grown, but the government refuses to give in. September saw the most violent clashes yet, with protesters calling out what they say is the harshest police crackdown so far. More rallies and roadblocks are planned for autumn. Jelena Milutinovic reports.
A peaceful protest of students and citizens on the University of Novi Sad campus suddenly spun out of control. A cloud of tear gas quickly spread across the area as riot police moved in to disperse the crowd.
To je bukvalno izgledalo kao rat. Oklopna vozila koje sam ja viđala samo u filmovima, sam ja videla ovde ispred sebe na kampusu, na mestu gde bi trebalo da budem sigurna.
Police claimed they intervened after stones were thrown at them. However, protesters insist the response was staged to show force. Arrests followed, and witnesses called it the most brutal police action since the student protest began. That night, the protest was broken up, but not the students' determination to pressure the government into calling snap parliamentary elections. Alongside their professors, they remain on the streets across Serbia. Every day during the 16 minutes of silence action, they honored the 16 victims of the roof collapse at Novi Sad railway station in November last year.
Ono što predsjednik, odnosno Srpska napredna stranka, nije predvidjela jeste da će ovaj protesti trajati ovoliko dugo i da zapravo snaga ovog protesta ne jenjava kroz razne oblike kao što je akademska mreža, kao što su zborovi i drugi načini organizacije. Tako da idemo do kraja, tražimo izbore i očekujemo pobedu.
Students are already preparing for the elections. Their candidate list, made up of experts who have not previously been active in politics, will only be revealed once the elections are officially called. The president has said this is unlikely to happen before mid-next year at the earliest.
Nama nije potreban nikakav građanski rat, nikakvi sukobi, nikakvo nasilje. Želim da razgovaramo o budućnosti Srbije. Svi zajedno, jer to je najbolje za našu Srbiju. I zato predlažem i nudim razgovor i debatu na svim našim televizijama, na svim našim portalima.
Students have rejected the president's call for dialogue, arguing that the government has failed to take responsibility for the roof collapse.
Predsjednik, koliko znam, nije zvao studente, predsjednik je zvao blokadere. Ja prvi, kao student, neću reći da sam ja blokader. Ja sam student i ne želim da budem okarakterisan kao neki blokader. Pre nekog vremena bili smo i ustaše i pre toga nacisti, a pre toga smo bili boljševici, pa pre toga plenumaši, pa u principu sve su to neka, mogu slobodno kažem, pogrdna imena za nas, za naš pokret.
The blockade continues, a sign at the entrance of the agriculture faculty in Belgrade, along with messages and symbols displayed throughout the hall, shows that although classes have resumed, students are still keeping a close watch on political developments and every move by the authorities.
Što je najvažnije, građani su se oslobodili straha. Studenti su u tome jako mnogo doprinijeli. Koliko je realno da se stvar razreši izborima, to je teško reći, ali mogu jednu stvar sigurno da kažem, a to je da Vučić neće raspisati izbore ukoliko nije sigurno da će na njima pobediti.
Government officials have maintained for months that the so-called color revolution, their term for the citizen protests, has failed. Recent rallies across Serbia show that support for President Vučić remains strong.
In response to the students' protests, the government and its supporters set up this tent settlement in the very heart of the city. The camp has completely taken over the space between the parliament and the presidential building. As a result, one of the city's busiest areas has been blocked to traffic for half a year now.
This scene, along with the detention of more than 900 people since the start of the student protests, highlights the repression opposition leaders recently warned European officials about.
Tražimo tu vrstu reakcije da Evropa stane uz sopstvene principe. Ne da bire strane, nego stane uz principe demokratije, vladavine prava, borbe protiv korupcije. I da ako to ne uradi, da će izgubiti i ovaj kredibilitet što je ostao. A dosta toga je izgubljeno zbog percepcije građana Srbije da je Evropa ćutala.
The bloodied hand and demand for accountability are seen at every turn, outside universities, on pedestrian crossings, and at farmers' protests. Students take particular pride in the new energy they have injected into Serbia's political landscape.
Ako je nešto dobro proizišlo iz celog ovog pokreta, to jeste osnaživanje i drugih zapravo pripadnika zajednica. Zapravo mislimo na zborove. Osnažili smo zborove u Novom Sadu do te mere da sam ja juče shvatila da u Novom Sadu svaki dan ima neki protest. Mi zapravo tako nastavljamo svoju borbu.
Mi smo za ovih 10 mjeseci do sada napravili verovatno najveći studentski pokret ikada, koji funkcioniše kao prilično definisan organizam i koji će dalje svakako evoluirati. Tako da jesen će biti interesantna.
November the 1st will mark 1 year since the Novi Sad incident. Students are planning a large commemorative gathering to honor the victims of a tragedy that has deeply moved Serbia's youth. Jelena Milutinović, Across the Balkans, Serbia.
In Montenegro, protests are spreading nationwide. Families, railway workers, and police officers are blocking roads, demanding justice and better conditions. But a new law threatens fines of up to $12,000 for anyone who does, prompting fears of further unrest. Leading one protest is a woman who lost her daughter and 2 grandchildren in a mass shooting. She says she won't stop until justice is done. Mirjana Miladinović has more.
For 8 months, Vesna Pejović and her supporters have been staging daily blockages on the main Cetinje road that connects central Montenegro to the coast. They are calling for justice. Their fight began 3 years ago when a mass shooting in Cetinje claimed the lives of 10 people, including 2 children. Vesna lost her daughter and 2 grandchildren.
Pa ovdje smo već 8 mjeseci. Znači, negdje od početkom februara smo počeli. Bile su i kiše, i oluje, i snjegovi, i sad sunčano vrijeme i tako. Međutim, niko se nije udostojio da nas, kako ću vam reći, da nam se obrati, da vidi.
A state ombudsman report revealed failures in the system that allowed a man with mental health issues to own a gun. No one has faced accountability for this oversight.
Sramno je od države Crne Gore da puste ranjenu majku i babu, da radi posao i da gleda svoju krv. To je žalost. To neka čuje cijeli svijet, a ne Evropa.
But as Vesna pushes for answers, many tourists are affected by the blockades.
I think it's really disturbing the tourists, and as you know now it's the highest touristic season.
Imate punu našu podršku u tim protestima, stvarno svaka čast.
Ako je već napravljena šteta, pa nemoj pravimo veću štetu.
Vesna and the others are not the only ones bringing attention to their fight. Police officers are threatening to block border crossings, accusing their government of neglect.
Imamo manjak policijskih službenika, u ovom trenutku preko 2000, što znači da posao tih ljudi moraju da iznesu ljudi koji su trenutno unutar sistema i takođe jedan od zahtjeva i na zadovoljstvo ljudi unutar policijske organizacije je i uniforme. Naše uniforme su toliko pohabane da evo već 10 godina ih nijesmo zamijenili.
Railway workers have shut down operations.
Menadžment pokušava da kaže da mi nismo glavna karika ovog željezničkog sistema. Ako mogu, evo sad ih pozivam ispred svih 85 radnika, neka siđu odozgo, ako imaju zdravstvene grupe, položen stručni ispit, stave kape i otpreme vozove koji će završiti svoje vožnje do krajnjih stanica. Čuli smo u izjavi izvršne direktorice da se prijeti sa nekim krivično-pravnim postupcima, otkazima. Evo jednoglasno svih nas 85 pristajemo ovog trenutka da pođemo za naše radne knjižice, a vi, gospodo, organizujte saobraćaj.
With more roads and railways being blocked, tensions are rising.
Reasons for blockades vary, but the goal is same for everyone. They want to be heard.
From those blocking in grief and outrage to those protesting against poor working conditions, the question of why remains largely unanswered.
Zašto se ljudi odlučuju baš na te radikalne poteze? Pa ja mislim da je to sasvim jasno. Zato što ti donosioci odluka od kojih sve zavisi u ovoj državi ostaju gluvi i nijemi na sve zahtjeve ljudi koji žele da razgovaraju sa njima.
Ljudi koji su suočeni ignorisanjem, brutalnom kampanjom od strane vlasti i nemoći, velikom tugom koje su pogođeni, govorimo sad o protestima na Cetinju, što im onda ostaje? Da jednostavno pokušaju da privuku pažnju i primoraju od donosioca odluka makar kroz blokadu puta.
Ironically, those decision makers today used the same tactics of road blockades to achieve their own goals. More than 5 years ago, members of the Democratic Front blocked roads in the capital, demanding elections. Now, one of them, Dejan Đurović, an MP from the ruling majority, is among those advocating for amendments to the law on public gatherings, which would introduce fines close to $12,000 for road blockades.
Onda kad smo mi kao Demokratski front blokirali upravo ovdje, ovu saobraćajnicu, ostavili smo mogućnost da se na 30 ili 40 metara odavde odvija neometano saobraćaj. Prema tome, to jeste bio jedan način, ali to nije bilo nešto što će se krucijalno zaustaviti saobraćaj. Treba da pokaže svako, i to je demokratski način, svoje nezadovoljstvo, ali definitivno ne tako da uništava i život i funkcionisanje države Crne Gore.
Analysts argue that approach is misguided.
Umjesto suočavanja sa sopstvenom odgovornošću ljudi koji nose odgovornost jer upravljaju bezbednosnim sektorom u tom konkretnom slučaju, mi smo imali prijedlog zakona koji je represija, koja je dodatna restrikcija i pokušaj obračuna se. Znači, ponavljanje scenarija iz Beograda. Nažalost, Demokratska Crna Gora, potpredsjednik Bečić, Ranović vide kao role model ono što se dešava u Srbiji i kako vlast u Srbiji reaguje prema protestima. To je nasilje, to je sila, to je pokazivanje moći.
Yet Đurović insists the government had to act because of the impact of the road blockades on the tourist season.
Ali smo svakako morali da utičemo na to da se krucijalne saobraćajnice od vitalnog interesa za državu Crnu Goru ne mogu zaustavljati na ovoliko dugi period gdje se zapravo zaustavlja žila kucavica saobraćajna.
For Vesna Pejović, no law, accusation or political spin will drive her away from the road until she gets justice. She and her supporters in Cetinje will continue their daily protests, maybe even escalating them as needed to more than the usual 2 or 3 hours until the new law is introduced.
Koliko budu oni udarali, mi ćemo jače. Mi se pomjeriti odavde nećemo, posebno ja, dokle ne svedem i tačku stavim na događaj, da onda samo idem na grob kod mojih, a ne po institucija. A oni su sve upotrijebili da se ovo zataška, ali ja nisam dozvolila. Eto, mi se uopšte ne bojimo nikakvog zakona, vjerujte mi.
On Montenegro's blocked roads, grief transforms into resistance. And as the government tries to restore order, for Vesna and many like her, justice remains the only destination that truly matters. Mirjana Miladinović, Across the Balkans, Cetinje, Montenegro.
In Albania, former political prisoners are still waiting for justice. More than 3 decades after the fall of communism, promised compensation has never fully materialized, and the wait has now outlasted the dictators they've survived. Ömer Saraci has more.
Life for Jack Beji, a former political prisoner, has never been fair. During the communist regime, he and his family faced relentless prosecution, and even in the years of democracy that followed, he had to navigate bureaucratic institutions in search of justice. Jack first applied for compensation for his years of imprisonment in 2009. The application was accepted, but he is still waiting for the money. But Jack is not disheartened. Every day he cherishes the small rituals of life, like playing a game of chess with his friends.
Mendoj se më ka ndihmuar, bile më ka ndihmuar shumë, sidomos në periudhën që isha në burg.
The cruelty of communist regime showed its harshest and most merciless side to many young Albanians who refused to accept a life of oppression. Tragically, an attempt to escape by swimming to Yugoslavia ended in disaster for the Beji brothers.
Vllai im, moj dënimin fatal, dhe ky dënim fatal me vdekje, në kohë që ai u vra pa gjyq, u bë gjyqi atje në Begdetit.
The prolonged delay in the promised compensation for political prisoners is for Jack both ridiculous and insulting.
Ne nuk jemi rehabilituar moralisht në datë parë, pastaj materialist. Unë jam djalë kulako, unë kam qenë I pasur, dikur, na çuan zero.
Although the government has started compensating survivors of communist prisons, progress for the families of those who never returned is slow. Time is running out for the victims, now elderly, putting a generation at risk of missing out on justice.
Fran's father served his sentence in the notorious Spatch prison. He died many years ago, leaving his son to inherit the compensation money. Fran doubts he will ever receive the full amount.
Tash I kena me marr kisën E 4. Tërkisë ka marr 15 milion, kisën E 4 se ka marr ala. Atë janë është I 4, I 5, I 6, I 7, kur dohat I funit, thash unë ty u bëhëm ja 200 vjeç. Me kënë, që bëhëm, po shumë bëhëm.
Out of around 42,000 Albanians prosecuted politically under communism, only 6% have received full compensation. Others have received a few installments or are waiting for the final payment, while 2/3 have not received a single cent, meaning the wait for justice may last longer than the dictatorship itself. Sociologist Ergus Mërtiri believes that prolonging this process, keeping people waiting at the doors of the ministries and institutions for a right that belongs to them, is not only a denial of rights, but also a theft of their dignity.
Pra dhe ky lloj diferencimi bën ata të vazhdojnë të ndjehen përsekutuar, që për ta shteti gjithmonë nuk ka, kurse për të tjerët ka. Dhe ky është problemi më I madh, pastaj diferencimi që bën midis stresave, ku ata që janë më afër përsekutuesve janë më të favorizuar, ndërsa ata që kanë qenë të vuajtur, këta vazhdojnë janë të dorës dytë edhe sot.
Mërtiri points out that in Albania, former secret services files have not been opened, crimes have not been punished, and in many cases, the prosecutors themselves still hold power and office.
Ndërkohë, përsekutuarit shpeshherë në shumë raste edhe kur punësojnë në shtet, gjejnë përsekutorët e tyre shefa. Dhe kjo është ironia më e thellë.
Experts warn that ongoing delays, bureaucracy and lack of political will are creating a new injustice and undermining transitional justice. For many, this is not only about compensation, but about recognition and the state's willingness to finally close one of the darkest chapters of its past.
Economist Sejfovic says that Albania's positive economic performance today has created the conditions for the state to deliver long overdue social justice.
Është për të keq që kostet e pagesave janë bërë gati të parëndësishme dhe zvarritin në kohë. Me sistemet e teknologjisë informacionit që zbaton në Shqipëria sot, janë gjitha mundësit që shtetit mos i detyroj, mos i zvarrit plotësimin e dokumentacionit e tjerë, por të shfrytëzoj databazat ekzistuese.
Preci also argues that the compensation rates of between $12 and $24 per day of internment and imprisonment set many years ago should be revised.
Do të ishte mirë të indeksoheshin, siç ndodh me pensionet, siç ndodh me pagesa tjera, siç ndodh edhe me pagat e deputetëve apo të zyrtarëve të lartë. Pra ka nevojë të indeksohet.
Ethem Fizolari, head of the Anti-Communist Association of Former Politically Persecuted, insisted of showing us the place where he endured his first years of persecution. He was only 6 years old then. Strangely, from the internment camp in the village of Alias, today not a trace remains.
Për mua do thotë vazhdimësi e diktaturës, por me mënyrat më të buta.
Fizolari sees the institutional delays as deliberate.
Për mua është një përsekutim i fshehur. Nuk është thjesht i hapur si dikur i deklaruar. Të preq 34 vjeç, do thotë që kjo është një sabotim për mua. Një, dhe dyta, është qëllimisht për që kjo shtresë të ngelet përjetësisht qytetar të dorës të dytë.
Stories like those of Ethem and Jack demonstrate that justice extends beyond mere financial compensation. It's about restoring dignity to every citizen. Only when everyone is treated equally can the wounds of the past begin to heal, paving the way for a more just future. Omer Saraci, Across the Balkans, Tirana.
In Moldova, European leaders marked Independence Day by pledging support for the country's EU bid. With national elections due in late September and tensions with Russia ongoing, talks of EU accession could give Moldova a strategic boost. But could that come at the expense of Ukraine's progress? Adam Amunu explains.
Voilà le message de soutien, de solidarité et de confiance que nous sommes venus porter aujourd'hui. Confiance dans notre avenir commun en Europe.
Mówiąc prosto, nie ma bezpiecznej Unii Europejskiej. Nie ma bezpiecznej Polski. Nie ma bezpiecznej Francji ani bezpiecznych Niemiec. Bez niepodległej i bezpiecznej Mołdawii.
Some encouraging words from European leaders in Chisinau as they joined Moldovan President Maia Sandu for her country's Independence Day celebration in August. But it was more than just a meeting of comrades. It was a high-stakes moment for Moldova as the European Union could steer the country even closer to joining the bloc. An initial cluster of negotiations could be opened up, according to an EU official and diplomats, as reported by Politico. It would also be a show of unity amidst allegations that Russia has been interfering in Moldova's electoral process. It's a sentiment many Moldovans share, allegations which the Kremlin denies.
Sooner or later, Russia will attack us. It's clear to us, it's clear to everyone. I think NATO is really, really important to us, and support from all European Union.
J'espère qu'un jour on devient membre de l'Europe. Voilà, pour nous c'est important ça parce qu'on va devenir libre, on va devenir la liberté de la personne, on peut dire ce qu'on veut, on peut aller où ce qu'on veut parce que jusqu'à maintenant on ne sentait pas ça.
Neighbouring country Ukraine's EU bid has always moved in step with that of Moldova's, since both countries received the first green light from the European Council in 2023. But Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who is widely regarded as Russia's closest ally in the EU and a critic of NATO's support for Ukraine, has complicated the process by continuously vetoing Ukraine's ongoing EU accession talks. That means any attempt at further bolstering Moldova's chances of joining the EU right now would put it ahead of Ukraine for the first time. Poland's foreign minister accused Hungary of blackmailing the EU.
One member state vetoed actual start of negotiations for a very particular bilateral issue. Hungary is of the view that Ukraine discriminates the Hungarian minority. And we think, sure, you can blackmail all of the EU with your bilateral issue, but there are limits. And in our view, Hungary has gone beyond what's reasonable.
To break the impasse, Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister said the EU could use a unique approach to allow both countries to progress without undermining Ukraine. Kiev and Brussels agreed to determine the benchmarks and preparation on a national programme for the adaptation of EU laws and processes. But this cannot be completed without all member states agreeing. The stage is being set for Moldova and Ukraine to join one of the most important clubs of nations. It's a race where there shouldn't be any clear winners, but is it an outcome that can be avoided? Adam Aminu, Across the Balkans.
Thank you for watching TRT World and letting us once again take you across the Balkans. That is all from the team for this week. We hope to see you next time.